seated. Good afternoon. My name is Henry Holper, and I'm going to be the chair of our group here this afternoon. I am a professor at the business school at the University of Portland.
And I'm Kate Brown. I'm currently serving as your Oregon Secretary of State.
And I'm Jeff Mapes. I'm a reporter for the Oregonian and a parent of a former We the People contestant.
And we'd love to have the groups go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Carl Stevenson.
I'm Benjamin Melendez.
I'm Maggie Kirschner.
And I'm Nicholas Finberg. Our teacher is Portia Hall, and our coaches are Jack Landau, Nadia Dahab, and Julie Smith. Get ready for your question.
Great, thank you. We're going to dive into Unit 2, how did the framers create the Constitution? Going to question 3. No society, certainly not a large and heterogeneous one, can fail in time to explode if it is deprived of the art of compromise, if it knows no way of muddling through. No good society can be unprincipled, and no viable society can be principle-ridden. Do you agree or disagree with this opinion? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your response? What compromises were made at the Constitutional Convention of 1787? At what costs and benefits? And how would you distinguish between someone who is unprincipled and someone who is principle-ridden? And what is the significance of those differences?
Government cannot thrive without the act of compromise, an agreement made between two or more sides in order to reach a common ground. Compromise is successful not only when lawmakers or executives making change can be firm in their core beliefs, but also open to the views of others. However, when a side is either unprincipled or principle-ridden, a dichotomy is established. That prevents compromise from happening. For example, someone who is unprincipled lacks morals or ethics. They abandon their principles at the sign of debate. Someone who is principle-ridden, on the other hand, stands firm in their morals and is unwilling to give up their principles in the name of compromise. Governments cannot survive without compromise, and compromise cannot be achieved with unprincipled or principle-ridden parties.
During the Constitutional Convention of 1787, many compromises were forged in order to build a strong, lasting foundation for the newly forming nation. First of all, the Great Compromise combined the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan in the formation of the legislative branch. The negotiation between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan led to production of something that would benefit both large and small states. The small states gained equal representation in the Senate. Large states gained representation in regards to population in the House of Representatives. This was beneficial to the Union as a whole and continues to be a very powerful concept in our representative system today. The Great Compromise showed the creation of a middle ground between the unprincipled and the principle-ridden, allowing change.
Additionally, the Three-Fifths Compromise was constructed at the Constitutional Convention over the issue of slavery and representation. This compromise illustrated how principle-ridden views can lead to unequal compromises. Unlike the Great Compromise, the northern states only had two choices over the issue of slavery: compromise with the South over the representation of slaves, or refuse and let the Union fall apart. Eventually, the North met the South's demands to preserve the Union, even though it meant the loss of power by doing so. By counting the slaves as 3/5 of a person, the representation of Virginia jumped from around 60% of the state population to 84%. Alas, the loss of power by the North did not outweigh the losing of the nation.
Compromise remains a key feature of our political system to this day. An excellent example of this is the recent omnibus spending bill that Congress passed just last month. In October 2013, the government actually shut down because the Democrats and Republicans could not agree on how to fund government programs in the coming year. This year, the parties compromised to avoid such a shutdown. The $1 trillion spending package is costlier than the Republicans wanted, but they obtained concessions from the Democrats. For example, increases in limits on political contributions, a partial repeal of recent legislation regulating bank investments, new law excluding methane gas from cows and calculating greenhouse gas emissions, and the elimination of restrictions on the use of white potatoes in school lunches.
Still, many congressmen today cling tightly to their extreme beliefs of their parties in order to keep their seats. Because people do not want to give in to the supposedly evil opposition, citizens as well as politicians representing them have become principle-ridden, believing that to compromise would to be giving up their stance. This never-ending spiral leads to the continuation of gridlock and the prevention of evolution as a nation, leading to what Bickle would describe as the impending explosion of a heterogeneous society because it was deprived of compromise. You're ready for your questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your opening comments. And I'm going to have the first question come from Kate Brown.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about why you think it is so difficult for Americans to compromise over some of today's major public policy issues.
Well, first of all is the corporate backing of many senators and representatives in Congress. With Citizens United being passed just a few years ago, there's unlimited spending that can be given to each of these representatives, which creates a principle-ridden system in Congress. Each of these representatives are a lot less likely to compromise over issues.
Also, if you look at gerrymandering that occurs within selecting state representatives, instead of the districts being on a population basis, it's more, the lines are drawn based on who can be elected for a party official. For example, if you look in Illinois, there's one district that goes completely around the city of Chicago, I believe, just to group people of the same racial identity together, though it is completely out of whack in a sense. Whereas if you look at Iowa, their boundaries and districts are more in a square that are based on actual equal population across the state.
Another cause of this could be also seen as polarization of the parties, which is a cause of gerrymandering. And because the parties, the two parties right now, are so diverse and so different, it's so hard for them to make compromise. A way we can fix this is because of our partisan primaries, it allows only a dominant Republican or a dominant liberal to go into office. If we had a top two primary, which would be anybody from any party that would be voted in to the top two would go into the next stage and could be elected.
To solve some issues like gerrymandering and political contribution, for gerrymandering you could elect a citizens board to do political redistricting, but each citizen cannot be politically aligned with one party, so they don't have any corruption within it. For a corporation contribution, you have to amend to get rid of the Citizens United case, saying that money is not free speech, so the corporations cannot tell senators and representatives where to vote.
Thank you.
So we're still living with the great compromise of the Constitutional Convention today. Do you think it continues to serve the nation well?
The Great Compromise does still serve the nation. Small states like Rhode Island still have a say in the Senate. Meanwhile, large states like Texas have the ability to speak out in the House of Representatives. So each state does get its own voice in Congress, but it always depends on who's willing to compromise in Congress for anything to actually happen.
I think the Great Compromise additionally makes the United States so unique. You don't really see a two House representative system where one is based on population and then the other is just equally based. Each state gets two representatives in the Senate across the world, and I think that makes the United States really interesting and how our political climate is set up.
If you would evaluate for us the argument that's put forward by John Locke, that equal representation of slaves ought to have been allowed because government is instituted to protect property.
Well, if you could look in a sense, the 3/5 Compromise did limit representation of slaves, But once the end of the Civil War happened and the 13th Amendment was brought in, technically each slave was counted as a whole person, even though they were no longer slaves. With the South wanting each slave before the Civil War counting as a whole person, they achieved that goal after the Civil War through the 13th Amendment.
Also, after the 13th Amendment, many southern states started passing laws like the poll tax, the literacy test, and the grandfather clause, which made it so African Americans could not vote, but then they still were able to count them in their total representation and population, which gave them representation benefits within the House and also taxation benefits, which if you look at their original goal when arguing for the 3/5 compromise, they wanted to have the slaves count as a person solely so they could get that representation in the House, but they didn't want them to have the ability to vote. So one could argue that the South actually was able to gain more power after the 13th Amendment.
Great, thank you. Compromise is often called an art. Do you think that's a good description, and why or why not?
I would not really call it an art. It's not really a beautiful thing that happens. It can be something. It can be very messy at times. If you look at issues like the Munich Pact, where there was the issue of, do we really want a second World War? Do we want to lose another great generation of men? That wasn't really an art. It was more of, let's save a generation that ended up not saving one.
Such as, I would like to agree with my colleagues, such as what we stated in our prepared answer. The Union also agreed on 3/5, so North, to preserve the Union. And sometimes that's what it takes. It takes somebody willing to give up a little bit of their morals just to say something for a greater good, the greater good of the nation.
And with the omnibus spending bill, one part of it was to defund Homeland Security so that the Congress could reevaluate Obama's executive order on immigration. So this is one malefactor of compromise because it's ruining something that's already been established in the name of something that could be considered greater to others.
Gotta call it there. Take a deep breath.